Hello everyone, and welcome back to Texas Homeschool Mama with Miss Raychal. Today we wanted to share another great book with you from one of our favorite authors, Elsa Beskow. This one is titled Woody, Hazel, and Little Pip. Let's read it. Come on. It was autumn in the forest. Strong winds were shaking in the trees, and everywhere the red, gold, and brown leaves were starting to fall. In their little house at the top of the oak tree, Mr. and Mrs. Acorn were thinking about the winter ahead. "You boys must go out and gather acorns today," Mr. Acorn told Woody and little Pip as he left for work. "That's a very good idea," says Mrs. Acorn. "I've got Mrs. Hazelnut coming for coffee this morning." Woody and little Pip promised they would collect the acorns, so after the breakfast the two boys went outside. What a windy day it was! The leaves were being tossed high in the air. "Let's go for a ride!" shouted little Pip, throwing himself on a large oak leaf. "Come on, Woody!" Woody leapt on behind, and the two boys held on as tight as they could. Suddenly, the wind carried the leaf right up over the trees, swirling and whirling it around in the air. The leaf flew faster and faster, spinning far away over fences and fields, until the boys, getting more and more dizzy, rather wished their journey was over. At last, the wind ran out of breath and set them down, plonk, in a spruce tree. They landed amongst four old women gnomes who were busy doing this week's washing. "Can't you watch where you're going?" the old woman grumbled. "You nearly made everything dirty again, crashing down like that. We've spent all morning washing these gnome beards and drying them." Woody and little Pip were so dizzy that they could hardly speak. But please don't be angry with us," they said. "It was the wind that dropped us down here." "I've got a good mind to turn you into acorn soup," said the oldest old gnome woman with a wicked grin. "Yes, yes," said two of the others eagerly. "No, no," pleaded Woody and little Pip. The youngest old gnome woman felt sorry for the boys. She had an idea. "Why can't they come do some work for us?" she said. "Let's send them off to deliver all the clean washing while we have a little rest." "What a good idea!" cried the others. "They can pull that heavy cart around instead of us." So Woody and little Pip were forced to trudge around all over the forest, delivering clean beards to the gnomes and the trolls. Back home, Mrs. Acorn was puzzled. Where had the boys gone? They usually came home for a snack and a drink during the morning. She stood outside her door, calling and calling, but there was no sign of them. Mrs. Hazelnut arrived for coffee with her two youngest behind her. "What's happening, my dear Mrs. Acorn?" she said. "You'll get a sore throat shouting against the wind like that." "It's those boys of mine," complained Mrs. Acorn. "They've disappeared without a word. I shall be so angry when they get back. But do come in out of the wind, Mrs. Hazelnut. I've just made some fresh coffee." "Thank you, Mrs. Acorn. That'll be lovely. I've brought some homemade buns for us to have with it." Harry and Hazel, Mrs. Hazelnut's two youngest, pricked up their ears. They wondered if there was a bun for them, too. While Mrs. Acorn and Mrs. Hazelnut were enjoying their coffee, there was a knock at the door, and in came Mr. Squirrel. "Forgive me for disturbing you, Mrs. Acorn," he began, "but I've had my eye on those empty rooms downstairs for some time. They look just right for growing my family. Do you think there's any chance I might rent them from you?" "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mrs. Acorn firmly, "but we can't have squirrels in this tree. You would take all of our acorns." She gave a sudden deep sigh, thinking about her two missing boys. "What's the matter, Mrs. Acorn?" asked Mr. Squirrel. "It's my boys, Woody and little Pip. They went out to collect acorns, and now they've completely disappeared. Oh, poor me, poor me." "Don't upset yourself," said Mr. Squirrel in a comforting voice. "I'll find them for you. Wherever they've gone, I'll find them and bring them home." Hazel, the youngest hazelnut, kept very quiet and started to creep behind Mr. Squirrel. She hid herself right inside his furry tail, then hung on tight. Even Mr. Squirrel did not notice as he said goodbye and bounded off through the door. Mr. Squirrel was halfway across the forest when he met Mrs. Magpie. She wasn't at all friendly. "What are you doing here?" she squeaked at him. "I'm looking for the two acorn boys," explained Mr. Squirrel. "Have you seen them this morning?" "Ha ha ha!" yelled the magpie, cackling with laughter. "They were flying over those fields. It was quite a sight, I can tell you. Two boys flying." She stopped and peered over his shoulder with a beady eye. "You aren't looking for our little hazelnut as well, are you?" Mr. Squirrel suddenly realized that a very small person was sitting there behind him. "Well, what a surprise," was all he said with a quiet smile. "Mrs. Magpie, would you please fly back to Mrs. Hazelnut and tell her I have her youngest with me? Now make sure you hold on tight," he added to Hazel, "because I'm in a great hurry to find those boys." Then Mr. Squirrel took off with great jumps and bounds. First he dashed across the fields and then up the branches, flying in bold leaps from tree to tree. Poor Hazel clung on desperately all the way as she was bumped up and down and scratched by twigs. With all Mr. Squirrel's bounding and leaping, there was no sign of Woody or little Pip. After a while, Hazel called out, "Please, Mr. Squirrel, couldn't we just stop for a moment? My arms are getting very tired." "Oh, all right," said Mr. Squirrel. "You had better get off and have a rest. I'll carry on searching, and then I'll come back and fetch you. Don't wander off now. There are some mean trolls around here." He tipped Hazel onto a toadstool and then bounded away. Little Hazel sat and waited, rather frightened to be left all on her own. She thought she could hear rustling noises close by, but there was nothing to be seen. Then suddenly a door opened in a nearby toadstool, and out came a little old man. "What do you want?" he asked. "The shop isn't open today. If you want to buy toadstool poison or dried fern leaves, I've run out. Come back next week." He started to go inside again. "No, wait, please," said Hazel. "I don't want to buy anything. I'm just looking for Woody and little Pip Acorn. Tell me, have you seen two boys flying past? They went off this morning and haven't been home since." "No, I haven't," said the little old man. "Two boys flying? A likely story. I haven't seen such a thing. Ask the old troll who lives in the juniper stump. He might tell you, if he's in a good mood. But don't annoy him, whatever you do." Hazel ran over to the juniper stump and knocked gently on the door. "What do you want?" came an angry voice from inside. Hazel started to shake in her shoes. I'm so sorry to trouble you," she started to call out. Then the door was thrown open so roughly, it banged hard back against the stump. A very ugly troll indeed was scowling at her. "What is it?" the troll grunted. I wonder, Hazel said nervously, whether you might have seen two acorn boys, Woody and little Pip, flying past?
They're the boys who lost my best beard, growled the troll. And they got the beards all muddled up. Now we've all got the wrong beards and they don't fit. Just wait till I get a hold of them.
He shook a prickly old broom at Hazel so fiercely she sat down with a frightened squeal. Then the troll went back into his tree stump and slammed the door. Thank goodness he didn't chase me, thought Hazel with relief. Hazel wandered away through the trees, not knowing where to turn. She was feeling very sorry for herself. But then she heard a sad voice close behind saying, "Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" There was a little lizard following her, complaining loudly. As soon as she stopped, the lizard ran up to her saying, "Oh, please help me. You're the only one who can help me." "What's the matter, little lizard?" Hazel asked. "There are two gnomes in my hollow tree," the lizard said miserably. "I've spent weeks getting it ready for my friend, Mr. Hedgehog, to spend the winter there. Now two horrible gnomes are hiding in it. Please come and tell them to go away. They won't take any notice of me." "Of course I'll help you if I can," replied Hazel. Off they went, and when they got to the hollow tree, sure enough, there were two bearded gnomes peeping out. "Now listen, you gnomes," said Hazel. "It's very unfair of you to take this poor lizard's hollow tree. You must leave immediately." The gnomes in the tree just laughed and laughed. Suddenly, the two gnomes whipped off their beards and shouted, "Hello! Hello!" Hazel stared in amazement. The two gnomes were Woody and little Pip. "We disguised ourselves," they said, "because of the troll. He chased after us, so we put on these beards and hid in the tree. It wasn't our fault the troll's beard got lost. The wind blew it away when the cart tipped over and all the beards fell out." "Excuse me," said the lizard. "Can I have my hollow tree back now for Mr. Hedgehog?" "Of course you can," Woody said. "We're going home now. Come and look." He went on excitedly to Hazel. "We've built the best raft you've ever seen. We're going to sail home down the river. We got a lovely big oak leaf to use as a sail." Woody, Hazel, and little Pip all got onto the raft and sailed away down the river. Woody was the skipper and steered with a pole. Hazel was first mate and lookout, while little Pip held the sail. As they were sailing along, suddenly a big prickly ball hit at the mast and broke it. They saw three chestnut boys standing on the bank yelling at them. "Come and play with us!" the boys shouted. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," called Woody crossly. "Lucky for us you didn't sink the raft. Now we'll have to mend our mast." "We'll help you," shouted the boys on the bank. They plopped into the water and quickly dragged the raft ashore. "Don't be angry," the chestnut boy said. "We didn't mean to damage your raft. We were only trying to say hello." "Well, we'll forgive you," said little Pip. "There's no point in quarreling. But you must help us fix the mast quickly because we've got to get home. It'll be dark soon." "Of course," the boys cried. "We'll soon fix it." Very soon they were all good friends. The three chestnut boys were very clever at mending things, and they were full of fun. Then Hazel made a little hoist so she could ride up and down the chestnut tree while the rest of them repaired the mast. Hazel was really enjoying herself when out of nowhere Mr. Squirrel appeared with his tail fluffed out and swishing. He looked very annoyed and fed up. "Where on earth have you been?" he asked crossly. "I'm off home now, and I've got no intention of wasting a single moment longer. Get up on my back at once and hold on tight. Woody can ride behind. Mind you both hold on now." He grabbed little Pip by the seat of his pants and set off. He barely had time to shout goodbye to their new friends. The ride home took some time because every now and then Mr. Squirrel would stop to give them a good shake. He said he had never come across such naughty children before, but their journey ended happily after all. Mrs. Acorn was so pleased to see them that she decided to throw a party. She rang Mr. Acorn on the spider phone. "Come home quickly, as soon as you can get away," she said. "We're having a party this evening." "Mrs. Acorn, my dear," whispered Mrs. Hazelnut, "are you sure a party is the right idea when these children have been so naughty?" "Please, please," cried the children. "We're so very sorry we disappeared like that." "Oh, that's all right then," said Mrs. Acorn. "Thank you, Mr. Squirrel, for bringing them back safely. In return for all your help, you can have the rooms down below whenever you want." Mr. Squirrel decided to move into the new rooms that very day. He bounded off and soon came back with Mrs. Squirrel and his 4 bushy-tailed children, all carrying their stores and things. After they had unpacked and settled in, the entire squirrel family came to the party. Mr. Squirrel was the guest of honor and was presented with a special bowl of nuts. Just as the party was warming up, Mr. Acorn arrived home with his 5 beetles following behind him. They had been out planting oak trees and now looked forward to some fun after their day's hard work. The party was a tremendous success. Some little elves arrived with rose-hip juice. Mrs. Hazelnut brought some of her best cookies, and the bumblebee came with strong, sweet honey. Mrs. Acorn's coffee tasted delicious. Mrs. Furcone brought some tasty resin to chew on, and a friendly gnome carried in a whole keg of juniper wine. A small field mouse brought a sack of corn from the cornfield, and 8 little glowworms came with their tiny lights. All through the evening they danced around the foot of the giant oak tree, while the silvery moon shone high above the forest and lit up the happy feast. And so our story ends just when everything is at its best. The end. Thanks for reading with us, y'all. We hope you enjoyed. Give us a like and come back for more.